guys. We're talking all about low light production streaming.
Yeah, let's show a quick little video from a live stream that we actually did this weekend with a music festival here in Pennsylvania at Lincoln University. And it got to the nitty gritty low light, and we realized, wow, there's some improvements that we need to do to our app to make it easier for you guys, and also some really great learning takeaways that we're going to share with you today. All right, so that was Macho Pop that we live streamed at the Pretty Good Music Festival in 2018. Great guys. They said we could use their music, so thank you guys. And today we're going to be talking all about low light camera settings. In fact, if you get the camera settings guide at ptzoptics.com/downloads, not slash apps, that's my fault. We have updated the camera settings guide to include all of this information. So one of the things that we did this year was we added a spotlight, a Chauvet DJ Intimidator Spot Duo 255. And that has made a huge difference in low light. You know, these cameras can do great low light pickup, but you got to have some light on your talent, especially if it's a big band. So this spotlight we're actually going to use today in our low light setup. And I think you're going to be really impressed what you can do, even on a budget, for small or even large low light settings on these cameras. So quickly, you guys may have seen a video that we produced called One Tip That All Churches Should Know About Live Streaming. And that is the check-in feature. And you can check out that video on our website. But I wanted to highlight Peter Kuzmov, who said he already does this in his church to great effect. In fact, he asks everyone in his church to check in to their church on Facebook and use a specific hashtag, and then they have a prize/giveaway with all the people that did that for the week.
We like it.
Very cool way to gamify the spreading of the amazing message that they're doing at their church. Then finally, as I mentioned earlier, we are going to be improving our app. I'm going to show it to you today, but as I was live switching with multiple cameras and getting into those low light settings, I realized that we should be having better reporting and more features for specifically low light and white balance when you're doing these live streams. And this is something that I learned after going and really doing a live production and realizing that this app is great. It does a lot for us, and we're going to show that off today, but we're going to be improving the low light, the white balance, and some other manual features that are going to make your job even easier. Now, what is this? This is an old film strip. And what it does is there's a lens there. And this is something we're going to be talking about today called the 180-degree shutter speed angle rule. It's something that everyone should know about because it makes your video footage look realistic. And it comes from the movie days. It comes from many, many years of video production. We're going to be talking about why this film set is still used today, even with digital video cameras, and we'll be talking about how that works. Tess, why don't I let you take this one? The streamer spotlight this week, it looks like it's Ralph Mesna, and I think I know what he's doing here.
Yeah, I thought this one would be perfect for today. Since we're talking about music production and low light, this picture is a great representation of a successful stream with our cameras specifically in a low light scenario. Looks like a really cool production. And thank you for sharing, Ralph. Hopefully we can do just as good of a job as you.
Yeah, there's a lot of cool lights there. And I have to say before we start is that low light is my favorite lighting. And it sounds crazy, but you have the most control when things have low light. When I was playing with this, and you can see right here, we've got, what is this? A lighting controller? The Chave DJ Obey 70? Let's go ahead and just play with this really quickly, Tess. You can see we've got full control of this spotlight here.
We've got
And
our
I have to
gobo in
say
there.
that this made the job so much more fun.
Oh, you got the joystick working on
The
it.
joystick works. It's quite fun, and we're playing around with the settings here. Oh,
That one's like Moana.
yeah, it's Moana. Anyway, oh, we gotta get off that shakiness. I don't know how I even did that.
Is it still moving or something?
No,
Oh,
one of these
gosh.
settings in here does that. Anyway, anywho, having that spotlight saved the day for our low light video production, and something like that, only $600 or $700 is a big improvement to your video production and give the cameras something to bite onto, if you will. So let's look at our setup here. So in my presentation, I've got the brand new IP PTZ controller app on Windows. And this app is controlling our PTZ camera. Oh, I see what you're doing there, Mike. That's okay. I'll switch over to this. That was right. And you can see here that I've got, well, first of all, let me show you that in the settings, I have my cameras in here. So these cameras are all connected to IP addresses. And so when we're going out and we're doing a mobile video production, we've got all the cameras on their IP addresses, and then we can quickly and easily switch between them and get really great low light footage. So right now, the camera is actually set to automatic. So that's what it looks like in automatic. Now, when we get to a really low light scenario, we definitely want to be looking at manual control. So that's what we're really going to go over today. And quickly, I'm going to go over a presentation with you guys. This is the PTZ Optics camera settings guide, and I'm going to breeze through a lot of this because you can go back and Tess, you remember we did a whole presentation on exposure.
Yes, we did.
How to get the perfect exposure.
I put the download link in each of the chats if you want to access that later.
Awesome. So as we know, shutter speed, aperture, and gain are like the pillars of camera exposure. You always want to start with the proper frame rate, then the shutter speed, and then the aperture. And I'm going to explain why. Then we'll go into some of the more advanced settings. But the first thing to understand is the 180-degree shutter speed angle rule, which essentially says that your frame rate should be double whatever your shutter speed should be double whatever your frame rate is. And the reason why is because if your frame rate is too fast, it'll look fake. Like right now, you see my hand moving. It should be blurry a little bit. Look, everyone who's watching the stream or you're watching this video on demand, take your hand and move it in front of your face real quick. It's blurry.
You can't see me.
If your frame rate is too high, it will look like Saving Private Ryan. They did that on purpose. On Saving Private Ryan, they used a ridiculously fast shutter speed so you could see like every movement. And
Okay,
it was like strobe
like the
lights
300 movie
yes, they do
where
that in
everything's just,
certain movies.
I don't know. Yeah.
And if for example, if you're shooting slow motion, in slow motion, yes, you have a ton of frames going and you slow it down. But usually we want to have a very much locked shutter speed and frame rate. So if you're going low light, there may not be any need to do 60 frames a second because that's going to put your shutter speed up to 120 and it's going to reduce the amount of light that you can get into your camera sensor. So we're going to suggest that you do 1080p 30 unless there's some reason you need 1080p 60, and then you double your frame rate. So your frame rate would be 1/60th. So with that in mind, generally, you're either doing 60 frames a second or 30 frames per second. Your shutter speed should probably be set to something like a known thing like 1/60th of a second.
Which is very low.
Which is
slow
low,
shutter
yeah.
speed.
The cameras can
But not the
actually go to, how low can they go?
1/30th.
1/30th of a second they can go
He's
to.
testing.
But we are going to recommend that you probably stick with this rule. There's a reason why video producers around the world use it. So there are more advanced settings. We're going to breeze through this because we have a whole nother presentation on all of this stuff. But the one thing that we're going to talk about today in detail is the low light. And you can see low light, we're saying is, we're really tweaking the shutter speed and the gain and the aperture. Okay. So we're going to breeze through most of this stuff because we've already talked about all of this stuff in our last presentation. I'm just showing you guys that it's here and it's available. Now we're going to jump into
You've added to it.
Low light.
Okay.
Yes, we've added the low light section to this. So the first concept that we have to understand is, what is a flat image? A flat image is an image that's taking advantage of the video sensor to its maximum capabilities. The image coming off the camera, you may not necessarily want to have really high contrast, really dark darks, and really white whites. Many times, people think that they can do everything inside the camera, but the highlights, by the time they get to your video production software, they could actually be clipping. So it's better to start with a flat image. Maybe it looks a little bit overexposed, but really what we're doing is getting as much out of the sensor as possible, and we're using our vector scope and our waveform monitor to bring down the range of the camera to make sure nothing's clipping. And if you don't have access to these tools, then yeah, maybe you do want to have a lot of contrast. And we give you the ability, and I'll show you with the IP app, to adjust luminance and contrast.
You're saying that the main goal of the settings within the camera is to make sure that nothing is overexposed, too much contrast.
We don't want it to be we don't want to be losing information.
Okay.
So it may seem a little gray, but to your eye, but once you get it in the waveform monitor, once you get it into the vector scope, you'll see, oh, okay, it's not clipping. Okay, maybe I can boost the contrast a little bit before it starts to clip. So we want to use the tools that we can. So in our scenario, we are using here 30 frames a second, and we want to go to, I call it a small aperture, you might call it a high f-stop, but 1.8 is as low as the PTZ Optics cameras can go, and we're going to look into that. So really, a low aperture is a wide opening of the lens, so we can get as much light as we can into the sensor. We're using a relatively slow shutter speed, but we're still sticking with that 180 rule. And then what we start to touch up on, and this is what makes a big difference, is gain and wide dynamic range. And we're going to show this to you in a moment when we jump over to the Moana room and we start looking at getting those cameras to look a lot better by adjusting the sensors and different things. So that's what we're going to do today. The image settings that you can do in the app, and this is the app we were looking at here, you can quickly switch. And one of the things that a lot of people have to deal with is, and I've been talking to a lot of people who live stream music festivals and outdoor events, generally you have to adjust the cameras every 2 to 3 hours, because the light at noon is different than it is at 2, is different as at 4, 6, 8, 10 o'clock. You can keep the cameras in manual, and you can tweak the gain and tweak the settings, and you could even tweak, and I'll show you what this looks like, you can even tweak the luminance and contrast directly in the IP interface without having to go into any additional settings. But try using the IP controllers and adjust that luminance and contrast just to get the contrast perfect. Now, again, you might be doing that with software. You might be doing it with the camera. It depends on your setup. And then finally, there's 2D and 3D noise reduction we're going to take you through as well. So let's jump into it. I just wanted to get that stuff out of the way so that we're ready to go. So now, like I said, we are connected currently to the camera, which is that current IP address. Yeah, you can play around with that. Feel free, Tess.
Which one switches the gobo?
You'll find it. All right, so now, Mike, let's switch to, Tess found it. Oh, good. Did you switch to the SDI feed of it? Perfect. All right, so this is the on-screen display menu that we're going to go into to do some of the advanced settings here. So in the exposure, you can see that we are currently on auto.
How do you make it stop?
There you go. The mode is on auto, and we're going to change that to manual. Before I do, actually, I just realized that I want to zoom the camera into the cameras, because these are going to be our test subjects, if you will. And you can see that's what it
Very
looks like
dark.
currently. It's very dark. It's difficult to see what those cameras, we can see them. They're in the dark. They're a little light in that room, but we need to really try to get the most out of the sensor that we can.
This would be very similar to outdoors at night,
Mhm.
just like the application
In fact,
we're running this past
I
weekend.
think that whatever we're doing with the flashing of the lights, we should probably right there. I think
So you're starting from scratch,
Yep, starting from scratch.
right?
And so I'm going to go to manual mode. Oh, that's bright mode. I'm going to go to manual mode. And you can see here that I already have the camera set to an iris of 1.8, and I have the shutter at 160. And now I'm going to touch up the gain. And with gain, what you want to do is you want to add gain until it starts to get grainy. So I've noticed, I've already done this experiment, so we can go all the way up to, what was that, 7?
The highest setting.
I've noticed that 5 is pretty good, and then we do a little bit of what's called DRC, dynamic range control, also around the 5 mark. Now, did you see how much of a difference that made already?
Mm-hmm.
So the cameras are that's actually probably the biggest difference that we're going to make right there. Now, in the color area, I've already done this. And this is a new feature that a lot of people might not know about, but we can actually control the color temperature by 100 degrees or 100 Kelvin per step. And I was liking it. And the cool thing about this is that sometimes you might not have control over the color temperature that's being used on stage.
Right.
A lot of times people will use a ton of cool LED lights, and there's not enough bright lights. So you can actually change what the cameras are seeing with this. And I kind of like it, like 35. And we can touch up the hue as well a little bit. Now, a lot of this we can do in the app as well, and I'm going to explain what we're doing to make that better as well in a moment. So we've looked at the white balance a little bit. We boosted the gain, and we also have the ability to do a little bit of luminance and contrast. But I want to show you that part of it in the PTZ app, because the PTZ app has some really cool features for doing this on the fly. So let's switch to the PTZ app in the presentation, and they'll still be able to see the adjustments there. So if you have 3 or 4 cameras, as you can see we do now, you can see there the luminance and contrast here. That will automatically switch when you go back and forth to a camera that has a different. So it remembers those settings and it updates them. So right here, we can just say, and if we're going to multiple cameras throughout the day, back onto manual there, we might want to just brighten it up a little bit and boost the contrast a little bit.
Without it becoming...
Without getting too
grainy.
much graininess. So I'm glad you mentioned that, Tess, because the next part of this, and the final part of this, is handing it over to Mike to do the software testing. So that's getting a little too grainy. I'm going to pull the contrast down a little. I'm going to pull the luminance down a little.
Is this you making the image flat? Is this that step?
Yeah, I'm trying to make sure it's not overexposed at all.
Okay. And then we can add to that once we're in our software.
Yeah. So I think that's pretty good. Now, Mike, you go ahead and take control there and open up your color correction for that camera. And Mike's going to show you kind of the final touches. Now, we're using the vMix color correction tools. I know this can be done on a TriCaster, and a lot of different applications have the ability to do some black stretch, some white stretch, and touch up on that. So right down here is where Mike is going to pull up the color corrections and the color wheels. So here's his color wheels. He's got 3 color wheels to play with. And those are generally lows, mids, and highs. And he can, there you go ahead and do some final touch-ups. So he's got a hue bar. He's got the ability to lift the lows and the highs. And Mike does this all the time and kind of plays with the images in post. This is really live video production, but it could also be done in post-production as well. And as long as you haven't overexposed the setup. And click right here, Mike. And I just want to show, this is, the next one down. Sorry, that one. Go ahead and click Waveform Monitor and Vector Scope with Preview. Look at that. So we've gone over this before in other setups, but these are the tools that you can use to see, hey, look,
Certainly nothing's clipping.
we're not clipping anything. So that's the kind of stuff that you can look at and play with. So that's our presentation, guys. I hope that it was helpful. Obviously, you need to budget time for color correction, setting up these cameras to look good. And
should we zoom out
shoot.
and show them how the room's looking?
Let's zoom out and see how it looks. So
which you could do right here from our app.
So that's what it looks like. And it looks pretty darn good. Now, of course, Mike could do a little more color correcting and we could do some more things, but that gets you the basics of what you should be thinking about and looking at. So we'll see you guys on Twitch, and we're going to answer your questions, and check out our Twitch channel. We'll see you guys soon.